After losing everything, his business, his home, and the woman he loved, Daniel Hayes had nothing left but an old truck and his loyal dog, Apollo. With a heart heavy from loss and regret, he drove back to the only place he'd ever called home, a ranch abandoned for 30 years. The people of Silver Creek said he was chasing ghosts, that the land was cursed and forgotten. But when Daniel crossed the broken gates and stepped onto the soil of his past, he found something no one expected. A light still burning beneath the ruins, and a miracle that would change his life forever. Subscribe to Soulful Stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because what you're about to witness is more than a story. It's proof that even after loss, faith never truly dies. The wind rolled low over the barren fields, dragging the scent of dust and old wheat through the morning chill. Silver Creek had always been a quiet valley in Montana, but now it was more like a graveyard of forgotten summers. The sun barely touched the land, its light thin and cold, painting the grass in colors of steel and ash. A pickup truck rattled along the cracked road, its engine coughing against the silence. Behind the wheel sat Daniel Hayes, 45 years old, his once strong frame now marked by years of fatigue and loss. His hair, dark with threads of gray, was cropped short around a face that looked carved from weathered stone, cheeks hollow, eyes distant, jaw shadowed by a few days' stubble. He had been a man of calm precision once, the kind who planned every step and trusted the world to follow reason. But that was before the market crash, before the lawsuit, before his wife's illness turned their apartment into a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. When she died, something inside him went quiet. He left the city within a week, sold the remnants of his company for almost nothing, and loaded what he could into the old Chevy his father had once driven. There was no destination except backward, toward Silver Creek, toward the farm that had buried both his childhood and his father's dreams. Beside him sat Apollo, a large German shepherd with a graying muzzle and deep amber eyes that mirrored both loyalty and wisdom. Apollo had been with Daniel since his early 30s, through business trips, lonely nights, and quiet walks after his wife Sarah had grown too weak to leave her bed. Sarah had been tall and slender, with chestnut hair that fell in soft curls against her pale skin. Her laugh had been like wind chimes, delicate and fleeting. She used to say Apollo's eyes reminded her of the Montana sunsets she missed. When she was gone, those same eyes became Daniel's last connection to anything warm. The truck hit another pothole, jolting Daniel from his thoughts. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Almost there," he muttered, more to himself than to the dog. Apollo's ears flicked, tail thumping once against the seat. They were a strange pair now, a man who had lost faith in tomorrow, and a dog who refused to stop believing in today. As the road curved, the landscape opened wide, revealing the remains of Hayes Ranch. What had once been a proud stretch of farmland now lay under a thin veil of decay. The main house stood crooked, its roof caved in on one side, windows broken like tired eyes. The barn leaned heavily toward the east, half swallowed by vines and thyme. Fences had long since fallen, leaving only posts that stuck up from the ground like rotting teeth. And yet, in the far distance, a few wildflowers had dared to bloom, swaying in the wind like stubborn survivors. Daniel parked the truck near the porch. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. He sat there for a while, staring through the cracked windshield. His chest ached. Not from sorrow alone, but from the strange sense that the land itself was breathing again, recognizing him. He stepped out, boots crunching against the dry soil. The air smelled of pine, rust, and ghosts. Apollo jumped down beside him, nose twitching, body tense with alertness. The dog sniffed the air, then trotted ahead, tail high, circling the porch like a guardian returning to his post. Daniel placed a hand on the rail, the wood splintering beneath his palm. "Dad would have hated to see it like this," he whispered. His father, Tom Hayes, had been a stern man, broad-shouldered with a voice that could silence an entire room. Tom had believed in hard work and weathered hands, but the storm that tore through Silver Creek 30 years ago had stripped him of both the farm and his faith. They'd left that night, carrying only what they could fit in the truck, Tom swearing he'd never look back. Daniel had been 15, old enough to remember the sound of his mother crying, young enough to believe they'd come back. But they never did. The wind stirred again, bringing with it the faint creak of the barn door. Daniel turned his head sharply. Apollo was already moving toward it, tail stiff, ears pricked. The dog stopped at the entrance, nose low to the ground, then looked back at Daniel as if waiting for permission. "Go ahead," Daniel said softly. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and old straw. Shafts of light broke through holes in the roof, casting pale stripes across the floor. Daniel followed Apollo, every step stirring echoes of the past, the smell of hay, the faint memory of horses nickering, of laughter and chores. He could almost hear his mother, Lydia Hayes, calling him for supper, her voice gentle but firm. She had been small and strong, with dark eyes that could see through a lie before it left your lips. Lydia had loved this barn. "It's where life begins," she used to say, "and where we learn how to care for what can't speak." But now there was only silence, until Apollo barked once, short, sharp. Daniel's pulse quickened. The dog was staring into the far corner, where shadows pooled beneath the collapsed beams. Daniel squinted, stepping closer. For a moment he thought he saw movement, a flicker of something alive. He crouched down, brushing aside old straw. There, beneath the timbers, was a small bundle of rags. No, feathers. A hen, miraculously alive, blinking up at him with wary eyes. It flapped weakly, scattering dust. Daniel exhaled, almost laughing from disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned." Apollo sniffed at the hen, then looked at him expectantly. "Guess we're not the only ones who refuse to die out here," Daniel murmured. He reached out, scooping the bird gently. It was thin but warm, heart beating fast under his fingers. Life, fragile but real. He placed the hen near a patch of sunlight. Apollo sat beside it, watchful, protective. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something loosen inside his chest, a tiny warmth, like the first ember of a long-dead fire. Outside, the sky was dimming. He walked out of the barn and stood by the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The world smelled of dry grass and memory. Apollo lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. Daniel gazed across the land, the same hills, the same fields his father once plowed, now swallowed by weeds. Somewhere deep down, beneath the grief and exhaustion, he felt the faint tug of belonging. But as night settled, a sound broke the calm. A distant howl, low, long, and haunting. Apollo's head snapped up, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. Daniel's hand went instinctively to the pocket where he kept the small revolver he'd brought for protection. The howl came again, closer this time, joined by the faint rustle of movement in the grass. Daniel's heart pounded. The land, it seemed, was not as empty as he had thought. The night in Silver Creek pressed down like a weight, cold and unnervingly alive. The wind crawled through the gaps of the broken house, carrying whispers that made the old wood groan. Daniel stood on the porch, his hand tight around the revolver in his pocket. Apollo stood in front of him, hackles raised, every muscle ready to spring. The howl came again, closer now, no longer a lonely sound. It was layered, several voices intertwining in the dark, echoing off the empty fields. Wolves, perhaps, though Daniel couldn't recall them ever coming this far down the valley when he was young. "Easy," he murmured, but Apollo only growled deeper, tail stiff. From the direction of the barn, a faint rustle followed, a sound too deliberate to be wind. Daniel raised the lantern, the flame flickering nervously. He stepped down the creaking stairs, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Apollo padded beside him, silent but alert. The beam of light cut across the yard, revealing the ruined fence, the overturned bucket, the single hen he had found earlier now huddled beneath a plank, feathers trembling. The night smelled of damp soil and fur. As Daniel approached the barn, the door moved, not pushed by the wind, but by a careful, cautious hand. He froze. Apollo let out a low bark, then from the shadows a voice, hoarse, steady, with a faint southern drawl. "Don't shoot, mister." The lantern's glow caught a figure stepping out, a woman, thin but upright, wrapped in a ragged coat too large for her. Mud streaked her jeans, and her hair, dark brown, nearly black, was tied messily under a wool cap. Her skin was pale, weathered from the cold, and her green eyes, sharp and wary, glinted like shards of glass. She couldn't have been more than 30, though hardship made her look older. She raised her hand slightly. Name's Clara Whitmore. Didn't mean to scare you. Daniel didn't lower the lantern right away. You're on private property. She gave a short, humorless laugh. Looks like no one's claimed it in a long while. Her voice held exhaustion, but also something else, defiance, the kind carried by those who've been pushed too far too often. Apollo sniffed the air, his growl subsiding slightly. Clara crouched, meeting the dog's gaze. You've got a fine soldier here, she said softly, and for the first time that night, Apollo's tail moved once in cautious approval. Daniel's instinct wavered between suspicion and empathy. He'd known enough desperation in recent years to recognize it in another. What are you doing out here? She looked toward the barn. Trying to keep warm, been moving since sunup. I used to live 3 towns over, Lost Pine. My place burned down last winter, been sleeping in barns ever since, didn't know this one was taken. Daniel studied her face under the flickering light, the faint scar running along her left cheekbone, the slight tremor in her fingers. She wasn't lying. She looked like someone who'd fought too many small battles to waste breath on deceit. You picked a dangerous spot, he said. There are wolves nearby. I've met worse than wolves. Her eyes flicked to the revolver in his hand. Guess you have too. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind's hollow voice. Then Daniel sighed, lowering the gun. There's an empty room inside, not much of a roof, but better than the dirt. You can stay for the night. She blinked, taken aback by the offer. You sure? He nodded. Just don't scare my dog again. Inside, the house felt smaller with another presence. Clara removed her coat, revealing a faded flannel shirt and a chain around her neck, a small silver locket tarnished with age. She didn't open it, but Daniel noticed how her thumb brushed against it absent-mindedly, as if touching something sacred. Apollo lay near the door, watching her, but his eyes were calmer now. Daniel handed her a tin cup of coffee, the last from his thermos. There's not much left, he said. Clara accepted it with both hands, her nails chipped, knuckles red from cold. It's the best thing I've had in weeks. She drank, eyes closing briefly in relief. As the night deepened, conversation came slowly. Clara spoke of wandering through empty farms, of sleeping under bridges, of people turning her away out of fear or pride. She mentioned a younger brother once, Eli, who had disappeared after joining a logging crew in Idaho. Her voice softened when she spoke his name, then went quiet altogether. Daniel didn't press her. He knew the kind of loss that turned words into stones. When the fire burned low, he sat back, rubbing his temples. I thought I was alone out here. You were, she replied, glancing toward the window where frost gathered. Until tonight. Outside, Apollo stirred, ears twitching. The distant howls had stopped, replaced by a softer sound, the scrape of paws against wood. He rose, moving toward the porch, and growled. Daniel followed, lantern in hand. The wind had died, yet something moved near the fence. A pair of small, glinting eyes reflected the light, then another and another. Not wolves, smaller, leaner. Coyotes. 3 of them, watching silently from beyond the yard. Apollo barked, a deep, commanding sound that echoed through the valley. The coyotes flinched but didn't flee. Instead, one of them, a younger one with a torn ear, stepped forward, sniffing the air. Daniel raised the lantern higher, his heart pounding. There was a strange look in the animal's eyes, not hunger, but recognition. Before he could move, Clara appeared behind him, her voice steady. They're drawn by the smell of straw and the hens. Won't attack unless they're desperate. You sound like you've done this before. She shrugged. I've been on their side of the hunger. The coyotes lingered a moment longer, then turned and slipped back into the grass, vanishing like smoke. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It felt watchful. Daniel exhaled, lowering the lantern. Guess the land remembers all kinds of survivors. Clara nodded, her gaze fixed on the dark fields. And it tests which ones deserve to stay. They returned inside. Apollo settled by the door again, head resting on his paws, but his eyes stayed open, amber and vigilant. Daniel glanced at Clara, who had already drifted to sleep on the chair, her locket glinting faintly in the firelight. He looked at her face, softened by exhaustion, and felt a pang of something unexpected, companionship. fragile and uncertain, like the first green shoot pushing through frost. He turned back toward the window. Out beyond the fields, in the pale wash of moonlight, something moved again. A figure this time, upright, distant, walking slowly along the ridge. Daniel narrowed his eyes, trying to focus, but the shape dissolved into the mist before he could be sure it was real. He stood there a long time, heart uneasy, as Apollo lifted his head and growled softly once more. Whatever haunted Silver Creek hadn't finished revealing itself. Morning arrived gray and thin, with mist coiling low over the fields of Silver Creek. The sun was little more than a pale disk hidden behind a veil of cloud, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and smoke. Daniel woke before dawn, the chill gnawing through his worn jacket. The fire in the hearth had burned to ash, and beside it, Clara Whitmore slept curled in the old armchair, her coat pulled tight, one hand clutching the silver locket around her neck. Her face, now softened by sleep, looked younger, less guarded, almost peaceful. A strand of dark hair had slipped across her cheek. For a moment, Daniel felt something stir inside him that he hadn't allowed himself in years, a quiet concern for another person. Then the floor creaked under his boot, and the thought fled. Apollo lay near the door, head resting on his paws, but his ears twitched as Daniel moved. The German shepherd, with his gray-muzzled strength and watchful amber eyes, was already awake, gaze fixed on the window where the mist pressed against the glass. He let out a low whine deep in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered. Apollo stood, tail stiff, nose twitching. Daniel followed his gaze. Out beyond the glass, through the fog, the faintest shimmer of light glowed from the direction of the old barn, flickering, moving, as if someone carried a lantern through the ruins. Daniel grabbed his coat and stepped outside, the cold biting instantly through the damp air. Apollo moved ahead, paws silent on the wet grass. The world was colorless, washed in grays and silvers. The faint light pulsed once more near the barn, then vanished. Daniel's breath hung in clouds before him. He approached carefully, revolver holstered but hand ready. Inside the barn, everything was still. The hen he'd rescued clucked softly from her corner. The broken beams dripped with morning dew. And yet there was that smell again, faint, metallic, like iron and smoke. Apollo sniffed the ground, then trotted toward the far stall, pawing at the dirt. Daniel knelt, brushing away the straw. Beneath it lay a set of fresh footprints, bare, small, and recent. A child's, maybe. But how could that be? The sound of movement behind him made him turn sharply. Clara stood in the doorway, the fog curling around her legs. Her hair was unkempt, her green eyes clearer now, though shadowed by fatigue. "You're up early," she said, voice still rough from sleep. "Something was here," Daniel replied, pointing to the ground. "A light, maybe someone walking through." Clara stepped closer, squinting. When she saw the prints, her brow furrowed. "That's not Coyote," she murmured. "Looks like a child's." Daniel frowned. "There aren't any kids for miles. Closest house is abandoned." "Then who's out there?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. The question hung in the air like fog. As they left the barn, Apollo began to bark. Once, twice, then a series of sharp, alert sounds. He ran toward the fence line near the northern field. Daniel and Clara followed quickly. Near the edge of the property, tangled in wild briars, they found something unexpected. An old bicycle, rusted but upright, its tires flat, its frame bent at the handlebar. A faded red ribbon still clung to the spokes, fluttering weakly in the wind. Daniel crouched beside it, brushing away dew. "This hasn't been here long," he said. Clara glanced around nervously. "You think someone's been living near here?" Daniel looked toward the distant woods. Maybe, or maybe they're hiding. The thought unsettled him more than he admitted. He'd come back to this land believing it empty, wanting it that way. But now the silence seemed full of eyes. They carried the bicycle back toward the porch. As they walked, Clara spoke again, hesitantly. "You said your father left after a storm?" "Yeah," Daniel replied. 30 years ago. Took us away in the middle of the night. Never came back." "He ever tell you why?" He shook his head. "Said the land was cursed. Said the storm took more than our house. It took something he couldn't explain." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father used to say the same thing about our farm in Lost Pine. After my mother died, he claimed he heard her voice calling him in the wind. he stopped sleeping. One morning, he just walked into the woods and didn't come back. They found his coat a week later. Her voice trembled at the last words. Daniel looked at her, seeing past the guarded exterior, the scar, the hardness, to the grief that lived beneath it. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She nodded once, blinking back the mist in her eyes. The day passed under a heavy sky. Daniel repaired part of the porch while Clara cleaned the kitchen, humming a tune so soft he could barely hear it. It wasn't until evening, when Apollo began to grow restless again, that they noticed the tracks leading back to the barn. More footprints, this time smaller, lighter, circling the perimeter. Something, or someone, had come back. They followed the trail to the base of the old oak tree near the field. There, half buried under leaves, lay a small doll made of rags and straw, its button eyes mismatched. Clara picked it up gently. "A child's toy," she whispered, "but it's soaked. It shouldn't be this wet if it's been here long." Daniel's skin prickled. Someone was here last night. At that moment, a branch snapped in the woods. Apollo lunged forward, barking fiercely. Daniel raised his lantern, light spilling into the trees. For a brief second, he saw a movement, a flicker of fabric, a pale shape darting behind the trunks. Then nothing. Clara gripped his arm. "Did you see that?" "Yeah," he breathed. "Looked like—" He stopped himself. He wasn't sure what it looked like. Too small for an adult, too fast for a child. They stood there, the fog, thickening around them, until the forest swallowed all sound again. Later that night, after they'd locked the doors and let the fire die down, Daniel sat alone on the porch. Apollo lay beside him, tail still, eyes reflecting the moonlight. In the distance, the mist glowed faintly again near the barn, just like before, pulsing softly, as though the earth itself was breathing light. He rubbed his face, exhaustion heavy in his bones. "We're not alone here, boy," he murmured. Behind him, the door creaked open. Clara stepped out, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "You think it's wolves?" He shook his head. "No, this isn't wolves." She looked toward the light, her expression unreadable. "Then maybe it's something the storm left behind." Daniel turned to her, startled. "What do you mean?" Clara met his gaze, her eyes glinting in the half-dark. "Some places don't forget, Daniel. Some places remember too much." Before he could respond, Apollo stood abruptly, ears pricked, gaze fixed on the barn. His throat rumbled, a sound between a growl and a whine. The light flickered once more, then vanished completely. Silence swallowed the night, and then, from somewhere deep within the barn, a sound, soft, unmistakable, the laugh of a child. Dawn came heavy with fog. The air felt soaked in silence, so thick it clung to every breath. The fields of Silver Creek shimmered with dew, ghostly and pale under a sky still bruised from the night. Daniel stood by the window, his hand on the cracked frame, eyes fixed on the barn where the strange light had danced hours before. His thoughts churned like the mist outside. The laugh they'd heard, soft, distant, yet unmistakably human, still echoed in his skull. He hadn't dreamed it. Neither had Clara, whose sleepless eyes met his reflection in the window. She sat at the table, shoulders hunched, hands wrapped around a mug of weak coffee. Her face looked drawn in the pale morning, all color washed away but for the faint green of her eyes. "You didn't imagine it," she said quietly, as if reading his mind. "I heard it too." Daniel turned from the window. "It sounded like a child." Clara nodded, expression unreadable. "Or something that wants us to think so." Apollo lifted his head from the floorboards, tail twitching once before he rose. The German shepherd, now clearly restless, padded to the door and barked softly, not in alarm but in insistence, as though calling them to see something. Daniel followed, pulling on his coat. The world outside was a watercolor of grays and silvers. When they reached the barn, the air was colder there, unnaturally so. A fine frost shimmered on the ground, though the sun had already risen. Daniel felt the hairs on his arms lift as he stepped inside. Apollo sniffed the air, then froze near the corner where the child's footprints had been. There, beneath a pile of straw, something new lay half buried, a photograph sealed in a cracked glass frame. Daniel picked it up carefully. The image inside was faded but still legible. A family standing in front of the very same barn, 30 years younger. A man with square shoulders and sun-tanned skin, his hand resting on the back of a small boy who couldn't be older than 7. Beside them, a woman smiled faintly, her face gentle, her hair tied in a bun. But what caught Daniel's breath was the fourth figure, another child, a girl, standing slightly apart, her expression unreadable. In her small hand, she clutched the same rag doll they had found yesterday. Clara leaned closer. "That's this place," she whispered. "Look at the door hinges. Same break, same slant." Daniel's voice was rough. "That's my father, Tom Hayes, and that—" He paused, pointing to the girl. "That's— I never knew her. My parents only had me." Clara frowned. Maybe she's someone else's child who lived here before. But Daniel shook his head slowly. "My father built this barn. Nobody else ever owned it." He turned the photograph over. On the back, written in his mother's handwriting, were 5 words. "For Lily, when she comes home." His stomach tightened. Lily. The name was unfamiliar, yet it felt heavy in his chest, as if his body remembered what his mind did not. Clara touched his arm. "You think your parents had another child?" Daniel's throat was dry. "If they did, they never told me." Outside, Apollo barked again, sharp and urgent. They rushed to the door. The fog had thickened, rolling low across the ground like waves. Through it, shapes moved, slow, deliberate. Daniel's grip on the lantern tightened. "Coyotes again?" Clara whispered. But these shapes were upright, human. 2 figures emerged from the mist, one tall, one smaller, both walking unevenly toward the house. Daniel raised his lantern high, light flaring against the gray. The taller figure was a man, perhaps in his early 50s, broad-shouldered but stooped, his beard streaked with gray. His clothes were ragged, boots cracked, eyes hollow with exhaustion. The smaller figure was a boy of about 10, with messy blonde hair and dirt-streaked cheeks, his hand gripping the man's tightly. When they reached the porch, the man lifted a hand in peace. "Don't shoot. We're not here to cause trouble," he said, voice rough like gravel. Daniel lowered the lantern slightly, studying him. "Who are you?" The man took a slow breath. "Name's Caleb Moore. This here's my boy, Ethan. We've been living down by the riverbank, in what's left of the sawmill." Clara stepped forward cautiously. "There's nothing down there but ruins." Caleb nodded. "That's true. But ruins are better than nothing when the world's forgotten you." He looked older than his years. His eyes sunken yet strangely kind. The kind of man broken by work and worry, but still clinging to decency. His hands, when he rubbed them together for warmth, were calloused to the bone. "We saw the light last night," he said. "Figured maybe someone else had come back. Thought it was ghosts at first." He gave a weak smile. "Guess we weren't wrong." Daniel exchanged a glance with Clara. "You saw the same light?" Caleb nodded. "My boy heard laughter too, said it sounded like a girl calling from the barn." Ethan spoke for the first time, voice trembling. "She said my name." The word sent a shiver through all of them. Daniel knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "You're sure about that?" The boy nodded, his expression serious, eyes wide and pale blue. "She said, 'Come play, Ethan.' But I never told her my name." Clara crouched beside them. "What did she look like?" The boy hesitated. "Couldn't see her face. Just her dress. It was white and it glowed." The air seemed to grow colder again. Daniel straightened slowly, his mind racing. He remembered the photograph in his pocket, the little girl named Lily. "Maybe she's tied to this place," he muttered. Caleb frowned. "Who is she?" Daniel's voice dropped. "My sister maybe, or something else." They stood in uneasy silence, the fog swirling around their feet. Apollo barked once more, then whined, circling near the barn as if drawn to it. Clara folded her arms, her breath visible in the chill. "We need to see what's in there," she said finally. Caleb looked uncertain. "You sure that's a good idea?" Daniel met his eyes. "No, but it's worse not knowing." Together, they crossed the yard. The fog parted like curtains as they neared the barn, revealing the doorway faintly glowing again. Soft white light, steady this time, not flickering. Daniel stepped forward, lantern in one hand, the photograph in the other. Clara and Caleb followed, while Ethan clung to his father's coat. Apollo walked beside Daniel, growling low, his fur bristling. Inside, the barn was brighter than it should have been. The light came from nowhere, no lantern, no flame. It filled the air itself, golden white and still. In the center stood the same rag doll they'd found before, now placed upright on the ground as if waiting. And beside it, small, translucent, shimmering, was the outline of a child. She looked about 7, her hair a soft tangle of curls, her face pale and gentle. Her dress fluttered in a wind that wasn't there. For a moment, no one moved. Then she smiled at Daniel, an expression of quiet recognition. "You came back," she said softly. The lantern slipped from Daniel's hand, clattering to the floor. His voice caught. "Lily?" But before she could answer, the light swelled blindingly bright, then vanished, leaving only darkness and the faint sound of Apollo whining at his feet. The silence that followed the burst of light was absolute. Dust hung suspended in the air, illuminated by the thin shafts of morning filtering through the barn roof. Daniel's heart pounded so hard he could hear it echo in his ears. Apollo stood pressed against his leg, hackles raised, eyes darting across the gloom. Clara's breath came fast beside him, while Caleb held Ethan close, one hand trembling against the boy's back. The glowing child, the vision of Lily Hayes, had vanished, leaving only the rag doll lying neatly on the floor where she had stood. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Clara broke the silence. "Did everyone see that?" Her voice was hushed, half disbelief, half awe. Caleb nodded slowly, eyes still wide. "I've seen storms rip mountains in half, but I've never seen anything like that." Daniel stooped and picked up the doll. It felt strangely warm in his hands, though the air around them was cold. He brushed a speck of dust from its fabric face, and for a moment he swore he smelled something faint and familiar. Wildflowers, the scent his mother used to weave into Lily's hair when she was a child. The memory rose so suddenly that it hurt. He turned to the others. "She's real," he said quietly. "Lily, my sister. I don't know how, but she's still here." Clara's expression softened. "Maybe not here in the way we are," she said gently, "but she's part of this place. Maybe she never left." They spent the next hour in the dim light of the barn, searching through old crates and broken chests. It was Clara who found it first, a small wooden box tucked high in the rafters, sealed with a single rusty latch. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied together with a blue ribbon. Daniel untied it carefully, his hands shaking. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the handwriting his mother's, neat, looping, unmistakable. He read aloud. "May 5th, 1993. The doctors say Lily won't survive the winter. Tom can't bear to speak of it. He says God wouldn't take a child twice in one lifetime, but I see the truth in her eyes. The fever's taken hold, and all I can do is pray. We'll bury her beneath the oak if she goes before the thaw." Daniel's breath caught. The barn felt smaller, heavier. He flipped to another letter. "The storm is coming. Tom says we have to leave tonight. But I can't go. Lily's grave. She deserves someone to stay. Maybe one day Daniel will return, and he'll remember what we lost here." His voice cracked on the last words. For the first time since coming back, Daniel wept, not quietly, but with the raw grief of a man who had held his sorrow too long. Clara knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "She called you home," she said softly. "Your mother, your sister, this place. They've been waiting for you." Caleb cleared his throat, voice rough. "Then maybe it's time we give her peace." They walked together through the fields, toward the oak, where the land sloped gently toward the creek. The fog was lifting, breaking apart under the late morning sun. Birds began to sing again, cautious but clear. Beneath the great oak they found what the letter had promised, a small mound of earth ringed by wild violets, untouched by time. Daniel knelt and placed the doll on it. "This is where she rests," he whispered. "All this time, I thought I left the land, but it was me she was calling back." Clara stood a few steps behind him, her dark hair lifting in the wind. "She wanted to be remembered," she said. You gave her that. Ethan crouched beside Apollo, stroking the dog's fur as if sensing the gravity of the moment. She's not gone, the boy said quietly. I can still feel her. Daniel nodded. So can I. Then something remarkable happened. The wind shifted, sweeping softly through the grass. A beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, striking the oak's trunk and spilling gold across the earth. For a brief, breathless moment, the figure of a young girl shimmered there, translucent, radiant, smiling. She raised one hand in a gesture both farewell and blessing. Daniel whispered her name. Lily. The light lingered, then gently faded, leaving behind only sunlight and silence. Yet the air felt different now, lighter, forgiving. They stood together for a long time, none willing to break the stillness. Finally, Caleb spoke. Whatever she was, she's at peace now. Maybe we all can be. He looked down at his son. Come on, Ethan. Let's help Mr. Hayes fix his fences. Time this place saw life again. Clara smiled faintly at Daniel. Looks like you've got neighbors now. He returned the smile, weary but sincere. Guess Silver Creek's not as empty as I thought. Over the days that followed, life returned to the ranch. Caleb repaired the roof while Daniel rebuilt the fences. Clara tended a small garden behind the house, her hands steady, her face no longer haunted. Ethan and Apollo became inseparable. Boy and dog racing through the pastures, laughter echoing where silence once ruled. At night, when the stars came out, Daniel would sit on the porch with his coffee, staring toward the oak. The wind through its branches always carried a faint sound, like the laughter of a child. But it no longer filled him with dread. It was a promise now, a melody of homecoming. Weeks later, when the first wildflowers of spring bloomed across the field, Daniel placed a small wooden sign beneath the oak. The carved letters read simply, Lily Hayes, beloved, remembered, home. He stood there with Apollo at his side, watching the light dance through the branches. The valley no longer felt cursed. It felt alive. The air smelled of rain and soil and hope. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the ache in his chest ease for the first time in decades. We did it, kid, he murmured to the wind. We came home. Apollo barked once, sharp and bright, as if in agreement. And for a moment, a fleeting, perfect moment, the world seemed to exhale. The clouds parted, the land glowed golden, and the sound of a child's laughter rose one last time on the wind before fading into peace. The light that had once haunted Silver Creek now lived quietly in its soil, not as a ghost, but as memory. A reminder that even the most broken places can bloom again when someone chooses to stay. Tom tat tiếng Việt. Sau khi ăn sáng Tết, Daniel cùng Clara, Caleb và Ethan phát hiện những lá thư cũ của mẹ anh hé lộ rằng em gái Lily Hayes đã chết vì bệnh ngay trước cơn bão năm xưa, được chôn dưới gốc xoài. Họ cùng nhau đến đó đặt lại con búp bê trên mộ. Ánh sáng và bóng hình cô bé xuất hiện lần cuối, mỉm cười như được giải thoát. Từ đó, trang trại Silver Creek hồi sinh. Daniel ở lại dừng lại nhà, Caleb và con trai giúp đỡ, Clara trong vườn, Apollo cùng Ethan rong chơi khắp đồng. Mảnh đất từng bị nguyền rủa nay trở thành nơi bình yên, chứa đựng ký ức và niềm tin rằng tình yêu và lòng trung thành có thể chữa lành cả quá khứ. In the quiet of Silver Creek, where ruin once ruled and ghosts whispered through the wind, something sacred took root again. It wasn't just the grass returning or the laughter of a child reborn in memory. It was faith, reborn through love. Daniel came back chasing what he thought was lost forever, but what he found was proof that nothing, and no one, is ever truly gone when the heart still remembers. The light that shone over Lily's resting place wasn't only the spirit of a little girl, it was a sign. A reminder that even after decades of darkness, God's grace can reach where human hope cannot. Sometimes his miracles don't come as thunder or fire, but as a whisper in the wind, a child's laughter, or a door that finally opens after years of silence. Like Daniel, we all have places inside us we've abandoned, memories we buried, hopes we stopped tending. But the Lord never leaves those fields empty. He waits for us to return, to rebuild, to forgive ourselves and others. And when we do, the ground blooms again. That is the quiet miracle of faith. It lives not in churches of stone, but in hearts that choose to keep loving even after loss. So if this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that light can still grow in broken soil. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, or share your own story of hope and redemption. And if you believe that miracles still happen, click subscribe so we can walk this journey of faith together. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones, guard your homes, and breathe peace into the corners of your heart. Whatever storm you face, remember, God's light is still waiting just beyond the fog.